Two sessions where we are discussing journalism in sports. Today we have Tariq Panja from New York Times. Before that he was at Bloomberg. He has been doing investigative journalism for many years. And we have Jeppe Laursen from the Danish daily Politiken, who has been writing about corruption in sports in many years. We have seen presentations of him before I played the game on handball, and today he will give us some insight into what he has done in the so-called football leagues. My name is Andreas Selliaas. I am member of the program committee of Play the Game. I've been part of this Play the Game since 2007. I also partly work as a journalist, at least I try to. It's hard to make a living out of it when you're freelance, but that's life. So, we start with Jeppe, who is going to show us a presentation on football leagues, and then he will talk a little about his frustration about working with these things. And then Tariq will follow up with his frustrations of not taking part of football leagues. No, we'll see where we end. But Jeppe, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I don't know if I show a microphone, maybe I should be just sitting here. Is that a microphone? No. If it's okay, I'll just be sitting here. So my frustration is basically the question, are the big clubs immune to revelations? Because Football Leagues has been a project where we've worked with 70 million leaked documents about the football world, which has exposed quite a lot of wrongdoing, especially in some of the biggest clubs of Europe, of the world. And my frustration, or the group's frustration, we have been like 15 media working with the Football Leagues. And one of our biggest frustrations has been that it's sometimes hard to see the consequences, even when we think we have some quite clear stories and some quite clear revelations about wrongdoing, which is against rule of civil society or against the regulations of football. And I'll just go through a few examples of the reaction patterns we have met with the big clubs. For instance, we have done quite a few articles on Chelsea. One of the ones I did was about this Danish guy, Andreas, one of the biggest Danish players, a defender. When he moved to Chelsea, we could see in the documents that Chelsea at the same time hired his father as a scout, they said, even though he had never been a scout. They gave him a contract of £11,400 a month for 4 years, and he signed that contract at the same time when his son, 15 years old, signed a contract with Chelsea, or 16 years old. Even though the Premier League has quite clear regulations against stuff like that, you're not allowed to pay parents in order to convince young players to go to a certain club, because it's, well, basically borderline bribery. So we did the story, and as you can see, the reaction from Chelsea is, we do not comment on speculation concerning confidential contracts or player-related matters. That was everything we got out of Chelsea, and in that case. And the other quote, listen, this is a story you got from some Ukrainian or something, I have no comment on this whatsoever. That was the father of Andreas Christensen who made this comment. And the consequence of the story so far has been none. The Premier League said they would investigate if they received substantiated material about the story. With the story, we published also the documentation of the story, so they actually had the substantiated material. And I cannot know whether the Premier League right now are actually still investigating the story. There is a chance they might be. But so far nothing has happened. But I think my point with this is all we got from Chelsea. It was not possible to get in contact with it, not possible to do any interviews, not possible to ask all the questions we actually had in a case like this, and also in multiple other stories about Chelsea and their dealings with the minors, which they have quite a lot of. Second example is another of the biggest club, Manchester City. In the football leagues, we did most stories about Manchester City, or at least related to Manchester City in some ways. This one I was mostly involved in was about African minors, how they made an agreement with a Danish football club and an African academy about how they could control players down to 10 years. In this academy, they made a secret contract, so they could choose any of the players of this academy to go to Manchester City, and then the academy and later on the Danish club had to do anything. They had to use any endeavors, is the phrase they use, to make the players go to Manchester City, even if they would like more to go to FC Porto or Bayern Munich. They should go to Manchester City. So it's like a story of borderline trafficking or something like that. And in the contracts, at least according to the lawyers we spoke to, there were quite clear breaches about the third-party ownership regulations within FIFA and the third-party involvement regulations. What is it? CPI? Yeah. So basically, a third party cannot control a club, and in this case, Manchester City actually got control over the Danish club. They could deny transfers in a Danish club, and that's basically not allowed. And the reaction whenever we wrote about Manchester City, this story or a lot of stories about financial fair play, we got the same sentence, which has been widely published in the media all around the world, because they say the same to everybody. I think the same to the same quote. We will not be providing any comment on out-of-context materials purportedly hacked or stolen from City Football Group in Manchester City, and so on and so on. But an interesting point for me was that the Danish club in this story reacted a lot harsher. And I think that shows they held a press conference 2 days before we published the story, trying to miscredit the story and try to in advance take out the air of the revelations. And I think that probably shows pretty good how the size of the club also a bit determines how they react towards revelations and towards media. It seemed to me like Manchester City didn't really fear this story at all, but the Danish club did. It could harm their reputation, but Manchester City is like too big to fall in some senses. And so far, the consequence of this story has also been easy to talk about, because there has not happened anything. A lot of people have said they are investigating, but still nothing has happened. And the third example is to prove my point about the smaller clubs. We did a story about Copenhagen, which is the biggest club in Denmark, but not a big club in the world. And they, for sure, didn't feel immune to the revelations either. They also had a really harsh reaction to the revelation about possible tax fraud, which really revealed about one of the players they signed. They changed some contracts in order to save taxes on agent fees. It's a really easy way to cheat the tax system, and it has happened many places in Europe, and they have also cracked down on it many places in Europe. In Spain, they're thinking about doing it in UK. There are discussions with Damien Collins, the MP, who wants to crack down on this trick as well. But in this case, unlike the Manchester City and Chelsea case, we had a really harsh reaction again. They released a press release saying that Politiken lied, that we manipulated sources, and that they would sue us. Obviously, they have not sued us, because the story was correct, and we had like really clear evidence. It was something like an email where it said the agent asked Copenhagen, "Oh, can we do it this way to save the taxes?" And Copenhagen went, "Okay, yes we can." And then they changed the contracts. The contract to the left was the draft of the contract, where the agent is as he should be on the player side. But then after he had asked if we could do it differently. He switched to the club side, and by being officially the club's agent, the player can save taxes on the agent fee. So we had quite clear evidence about the story. So I think the patterns of reaction that at least I experienced in this world is when we did Football Leagues 1, it was in 2016, and the second part was in November 18. We saw quite a new approach. In 16, it seemed like the big clubs, even the biggest clubs, were like they feared the stories and they were threatening with lawsuits. They took it really seriously. They probably did in the second round as well, but their reaction, at least towards the public and towards us as media, were quite different. We just received these few short quotes, or in some cases even no quotes at all. So my take is that they have learned that we will publish anyway, because we trust the documentation we have, but they have also learned that the less they say, they can make the story die. If they say a lot, they risk making a fuss about the story, creating more focus on it, and it seems like they've learned that they are somewhat immune to the story. That's at least how it seems to me. But are they actually then immune? Not entirely. They send a signal that they are, but they can get sanctions, and some of them have been sanctioned, not only after football leagues, but also after investigations from especially FIFA into minors, and also from tax authorities. There has definitely been sanctions, but not sanctions that really hurt or harm the big clubs in any big way. I think the toughest sanction are probably the transfer ban, which Chelsea has received, and before them also other clubs like Barcelona and Atletico Madrid for getting minors against the rules, because the transfer ban is quite severe that you're not allowed to buy players for a year or two. So they're not totally immune, but most often they get sanctions. For instance, a fee, and a fee for a club like Manchester City and Chelsea doesn't really mean anything, because the amounts are so small that yeah, it's like pissing in the sea, basically. What I think is have been the most severe consequences for the clubs after some of the Football League stories has actually been fan reactions, because I think they have learned that they don't have to take the stories from us that serious. It will go away at some point, and the sanctions are not necessarily that big from the authorities. But we saw, especially after we did a story about a European Super League, big clubs were thinking about breaking out of the Champions League and doing a Super League. At least they discussed it. It's not clear whether they actually wanted to do it or they just used it as a way to put pressure on UEFA. But after that, we saw fans all over Germany putting up banners where they said, if you want to do a Super League, it's without us. And that's probably the hardest consequence a club can feel, because that's the whole basis for the business. And it seems like the big clubs take things more seriously, like international federations and sports in general, when it can hit their wallets. So if fans or sponsors start reacting, it's probably then we are at a place where they will actually take the revelation seriously. But that was actually my final point, and as I say, what I would like to discuss at a certain point is what can we do about this? What can we as journalists do? It's really difficult to stand up against the big clubs, because they are somewhat immune, or try to be.
Okay, thank you, Jeppe. Maybe it's before I give the word to Tariq, I have a question, probably a little bit stupid, but can you give the audience a little bit insight what Football Leagues,
yes,
what it is?
Yeah, it started.
1 minute.
Yeah. Okay. It started in 2015 when a web page. There was suddenly a web page called the Football Leagues, and they started leaking confidential contracts from the world of football. Quite a lot of them exposed wrongdoing. For instance, with Twente, who were later sanctioned. They got a ban from European football for a few years. That's actually one of the harshest sanctions Football Leagues has ever led to, but that was before any media were involved. That was just a web page, and we didn't know who was behind it. It was a guy who called himself John. Later on, he teamed up with Der Spiegel in Germany. He handed them 18 million documents. They set up a media group of, I think we were 12 media back then. Politiken was one of them, 12 European media. We did one round of Football Leagues, and we did another round in 2018 when the amount of documents had risen to 70 million, I think. And later on, of course, it has been exposed that the man behind Football Leagues is a Portuguese, young Portuguese man called Rui Pinto, who is now in jail in Portugal, isolated.
Okay, thank you. Tariq, you have been, Jeppe told me yesterday that he has not been covering football that much, only Football Leagues, mostly handball and other sports.
No.
Okay, you told me.
I was drunk maybe, I don't know.
That's the Danish approach.
It's not true.
No. Tariq, you have been working on football for a long time. You have even written a book about some of the topics covered in Football Leagues revelations. Can you give us a little bit insight into your thought about your impact as a journalist, and also some comments on being outside of the Football Leagues revelations?
Yeah. Well, before that, just a segue from Jeppe's talk. We were presented at Play the Game, the last one, the book we wrote, and it was about quite an esoteric subject at the time, third-party ownership, which is now kind of everywhere. Everyone knows what it is. These investors buying these kids, etc., thanks to Jeppe and the group. But at the time, me and a former colleague of mine, we spent years working on this book because it was so hard to get these documents. It was so hard. I mean, the football transfer industry is worth about 7 billion a year. It's extremely secretive, or it was until this Portuguese chap dumped a load of contracts on the internet. So we'd been working on this book, and I remember the day, in September 2015, I was living in Brazil, and a lawyer messaged me. We were very close to, it was with the editor at the time, ready to be printed in early 2016. And this Portuguese, Brazilian lawyer I know, he sent me this. He said, "Have you seen this?" I was walking in Botafogo from a public notary, which is, if you've ever been to Brazil, is like the worst thing you can do, waiting for these stamps for hours. And then I saw this thing, and it was these 2 or 3 player contracts, the first ones, they were related to Portuguese clubs. And one of them happened to be, I think it was Marcos Rocco, who plays for Manchester United. And that was one of, I think, maybe 2 or 3 contracts we actually managed to get over years to try and get in our book. And part of me was like, wow, this is amazing. And the other part was, oh God, we've spent years trying to just get these kind of needles out of the haystack. And a factory of needles has opened up, and you can pick whatever you want, essentially. So that happened. Essentially, it's a good thing, though, that we have some visibility on an industry that's so kind of important to the public. In that sense, millions of people want to know who's moving where, etc. And also this money trail for investigators who are sitting in the other room. It's quite important to know money laundering risks, tax evasion, etc. But now to talk about, I guess, being not privy to this information, the process of getting information and documents, etc., is not easy, because we are trying to publish information essentially that those people in power, those people who are wealthy, don't want in the public domain, and often the relationships with the regulators, in European sense could be UEFA, global sense could be FIFA, or any governing body, those relationships aren't regulator and regulated. Sometimes they do business together, sometimes they have the same people on the board. So it's very tough to do this. And that raises another kind of question as well about access to people who will get you this information versus being too close to those people as well. This is a very grey kind of world, in my opinion. The people that hold this information, you've got to think there's a reason why they give it to you, etc. Plus, what's the quid pro quo here? One day the person who might have given you the information, or the people, or whoever, what if they're up to no good? Are you going to be brave enough to then report on them? And what are the consequences of that? These are important questions. I think we as an industry, we should be having a lot. And just to move on to one of these football leaks cases, Jeppe mentioned Manchester City. And Manchester City, according to the documents that Jeppe's group had got, among other things, they allegedly, I believe the documents are correct, it's quite kind of nakedly obvious, they manipulated numbers related, they deny this of course, for any legal issues here, they manipulate numbers allegedly that inflate their sponsorship income by tying up with a bunch of companies in the United Arab Emirates where the team's ownership is from. That essentially is a breach of cost control regulations. He mentioned financial fair play. Essentially, it is a way of ensuring that clubs live within their means, don't go bust. Main reason. Two, that you don't have a kind of in terms of doping, you can have an injection instead of like steroids, just money being poured into one club, and it is able to secure the best talent in the world, or in another sense, they can play with 13 players while everybody else is playing with 11, right? So level playing field. So that information actually had a big impact. There was an investigation, and I found out that the UEFA investigatory group at the time were going to push, and have done, to the judges' chamber essentially, for Manchester City to face at least a one-year ban, potentially a multi-year ban, which is far stronger than anything, including a transfer ban, not playing in the Elite Champions League. Even the sheikh or any billionaire with all the money you've got, you can't buy your way into this competition, and that is a stinging punishment and very embarrassing should it come to pass. Now, after publishing it, a new situation, a new kind of reality for us working in the media, which has been a phenomenon for the last 5-10 years, is Twitter, social media, and fan tribalism, which always exists, right? Everyone supports whichever team you support, and they can't do no wrong in the eyes of their fans, even if, as Donald Trump said, I could walk down, I think he said Times Square or whatever, and shoot someone, and I wouldn't lose one of my voters. And I think a lot of these clubs are the fans so beholden to them that they can literally do whatever they want. And that kind of manifests itself when we publish anything slightly controversial. And essentially, I'm not an opinion writer, I just report the news. The tribal hatred and allegations of bias, paranoia, you've been bought by this guy, that guy, and it just, we are in this environment now. We're under, and this is, I think, a good thing, more scrutiny than we ever were, because we're scrutinising all these guys. Perhaps we should be too, in the way we work. But I know of colleagues who have suffered far more significantly than I have from this abuse, and this is the challenge. When you publish, there's a million decisions you make to publish a story. And one of the things, I guess, is something like this. In my case, luckily we found out there was a fake Twitter account appeared, which was just like mine, and was sending messages out, etc. We live in very interesting times, whether it is with technology, whether it is someone hacking data and publishing it, someone making fake social media accounts. It could be professionals we cover, and also I would say the level of sophistication by people who are maybe not directly employed by clubs and institutions, but are consultants, etc. The kind of skullduggery involved, fake documents, pretending to be people, etc. We're in a time where doing our job, perhaps you could say we have more information than ever before that we could potentially disseminate to the public. We're also in perhaps, I think, an extremely risky environment as well. And this is all kind of connected. Apologies for being a bit rambling there. I'm sure we can kind of move on into what we were going to talk about football leagues.
Yeah, but before we take questions from the audience, Jeppe, Tariq mentioned Twitter trolls and fake accounts. Can you tell us a little bit what the reactions have been on the football leagues, except for lawsuits from clubs? And how that has affected your work?
Yeah, it has been really different. We have seen, as I showed in the slideshow, we have in Germany had quite a big support for the stories and for the project. But when we write about, especially a club like Manchester City, there are a lot of really critical people in Twitter trying to spam the threads. Whenever a story is posted, they try to like take over the narrative of the story. I think it's probably mostly the journalists from Spiegel that's experienced that, because they've been the main media in the project. We have experienced it in one Danish story, the one I told you about, the young African. We suddenly had 5 different African Twitter accounts writing about how everything we worked with was wrong, and was obviously wrong, and that we had been manipulated about by an evil network, a not well-defined evil network, but that we have been manipulated. So we have experienced stuff like that as well.
You talk about, your discussion was impact of journalism, but also the football leagues has some kind of impact on journalism. Tariq, can you tell us a little bit what you feel about what kind of journalism we have seen in football leagues?
In what sense?
You are, I guess you are envious about getting all the documents, but can you tell us a little bit how you see journalism using documents like Jeppe has used and all the 14 media partners?
Yeah, it's Jeppe, you probably feel it more than me. It must be a gold mine, right? It's like going to a candy store and picking which story you're going to do next, which is kind of almost unheard of. The football world, as big as it is one of the most closed environments to operate in. Especially when we're here in the United States, where you have open locker rooms and access to general managers and everything else. In European football, particularly, I'm based in England, that environment is getting closed, more and more closed, in the sense you either are on good terms with the team or a paid-for sponsor or something. I find it really difficult to see how anyone can do any critical reporting in that environment, whereas you're going to have the door slammed on you unless you toe the party line. And just one more anecdote, actually, to sort of underline this point. I remember writing a story about it's a very narrow subject. It was a business story that Premier League soccer teams were going to have a new form of sponsorship. They could attach a patch, a company's name, on the sleeve of their shirt. This was 2 or 3 years ago now, and that is a new revenue stream, etc. But some of the teams hadn't kind of preempted that they could benefit from something like this, and they signed very long contracts with their main jersey partner. And in those contracts, says you could not have another company on any of your apparel. And one of those, I'm not going to name the club actually. One club I found out, this club definitely from its commercial officer who I've known said they can't have this on the shirt, and out of just professionalism, called the club for a comment, saying, look, I found this out about this. Would you like to comment on this just tiny piece of information? And the club spokesman said, well, I don't know where you're getting that information from. Because I said, well, I'm not going to tell you, but I know it's true. He goes, well, look, I don't think it's true. Let me call you back. Calls me back. He said, yeah, it kind of is true. We're negotiating no, we're looking at the contract, blah, blah. So essentially it is true, and it is in the contract, and they're looking at it to see how they can get at it. Essentially was the. So I wrote a story with the information that I had, and again, out of fairness, that they're investigating, looking at the contract. And I wrote a story, and this guy called me, started screaming at me, and said, "You didn't write what I told you to write." And I said, "Yeah, I know, because I know what I was going to write. I phoned you just out of courtesy." And he said, and he then said, "Right, in that case, you will never get a comment from Chelsea Football." There you go, Chelsea. Football club again, right? And I was like, okay, that's absolutely fine. Now, could you send me a letter or an email to say this, so it would save me the trouble of ever ringing you up again, and every time we publish a story, we can say, this company, this person, refuses to ever cooperate with us, so we didn't bother ringing you. A couple of hours later, we were like, oh, apologies, fair's fair. But that made me think, how many journalists who have to cover these clubs on a daily basis are being squeezed and squeezed in a way that you end up being either a stenographer or a mouthpiece for the club. And again, this person has a job, he needs to keep his job, he needs to have his stories in whatever publication he's working in, and if he loses all of that access, what's he going to say to his boss? So these are real tensions. So when we read articles, especially for the beat reporters, I find that extremely challenging. So when you get something like football leagues, that must be golden, because you've got all of these stories, you've got official documentation, and you don't need to rely on these people to help you do your job. Because I saw a statistic, and I'm being conservative here. I think there's like 8 public relations official to 1 journalist. As our industry is declining, theirs is getting bigger and bigger. There are more walls and more buffers to try and get information out. So this thing goes around all of that and is good. However, the question is the way this information was gathered. Is this the way? Is it okay? I wake up thinking differently every day. You essentially walk into someone's laundry basket, go through the clothes and show the world what's there. There's stories of people's salaries. Now, footballers, they don't force their employers to pay them a lot of money. This is the industry they're in. If they're being paid that money, that's what the deal is between two partners. If they're tax evading, fine. But I've seen a lot of gratuitous reporting on say, particularly on how much people earn. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't know what it will be like in your offices or wherever you work, where every day someone's publishing your colleague's salary and your salary and the other guy's, what that does inside your business. Maybe we should all do that. But that's one of the things. What do you publish and what do you not publish? What's in the public interest, or what is just titillating and interesting? And that's something that you guys must have faced a challenge with.
Definitely, and that's also a big part of the challenge of being 15 media from 12 different countries, or what it was like, because we all have different ethical standards, or we set the bar differently as to public interest. For instance, my newspaper, it's easy for me to talk about because we didn't mention salaries unless it was an important part of the story. Like for instance, if it was a story about tax evasion, the salary is relevant for the story because it shows how much a player or a club or whatever makes, and it puts perspective to why on earth they are evading taxes. But there has been different standards, and there wasn't like any police officer within the media group saying you can write this, you can write this. It was basically up to every other media to decide what the public interest in their country is, also because there are different cultures within different countries. The bar is set differently. So, but it has been a challenge, and I think you will see quite different expressions of the Football League's project in the different countries.
Okay. As far as I know, Sarah Lewis, she's a Chelsea fan. Maybe she can help you with problems with the club. Jens, you have a question. We can open the floor for questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Questions actually, but both.
Wait a little bit, we have a microphone.
Two questions, but both about access from a different angle. What? Louder. Okay. First, maybe that was already discussed. Jeppe, access question. Football League's data. How free have you been? What kind of access did you get? As far as I know or heard from others, only a very small percentage of it. And Tariq, you mentioned the access question in the daily business on the teams. Of course we cannot demand, okay, then go for another job if you cannot handle that on the level on your daily business, and you don't get access to Chelsea or whatever anymore. But in general, I would like you to elaborate a little bit more about that. Your opinion on that, because of course this is a big question in so-called football journalism. At the end, I would say this is not journalism anymore.
Jeppe first, and then Tariq.
To my knowledge, we have had access to all the football relevant documents. We have had a database, a searchable database, where we had access to 70 million documents. So I don't think there's anything we haven't had access to as a partner.
Okay.
About Chelsea?
No. Fictitious club. I listened to a podcast the other day, a technology podcast, and there's this with Kara Swisher. She does a technology journalist who writes opinions in our newspaper. And on the podcast, she said she prefers it never meeting the people she covers because it's much easier to throw the hammer down on someone you don't know, right? And I would agree, not that we're looking to throw the hammer down on anyone, but there is human nature here. Once you meet someone, when you meet people, etc., and it's important to keep that objectivity and that line between the people you cover and your coverage and yourself. We are orbiting the same space, getting closer and closer often. I've sat in many hotel lobbies with you where 4 feet away from these guys for 2 weeks. And this is you've got to keep reminding yourself, you have to go story by story. And the access, I've had people who I would have spoken to or would have provided information who don't now. because of stuff we've written, and that that affects your work in some way. But you've got to look yourself in the mirror and say, look, you can't pick and choose who gets who you I don't want to use the word exposed, it's not fair, who you report about, or someone who's done something wrong, or someone whose actions deserve to be made public, and then you say, well, the other guy, he did, or she gave that piece of information. That way is unhealthy. But I would say it'd be naive, absolutely naive, to think it doesn't happen. There was again, I'm not going to name.
Maybe I'm not going to.
You never know. There's a very famous journalist who's recently retired, and he wrote some very acerbic, very, very tough kind of news lines on people in the sports industry. But he also, I remember him saying he had this protected list, and that kind of made me feel a little bit queasy. A protected list means these are the people, whatever they do, they won't appear in print. They won't appear in print because they provide information. That's not a healthy way for our business to work. But again, I think it happens a lot, and I think for the beat writers whose beats are very, very narrow, almost occupational hazard. What if you have to be very strong-willed and a very strong character to say, I'm going to lose all the access to the one tiny corner of the sports world I cover to write this story, because I'd love to see if they're still working in 2 months. You've got a mortgage, you've got your kids, and all the rest of it probably, right? So these are really tough questions.
Jens, are you satisfied with the answers? Bonita, you had a question?
Yeah, sure. I'm not quite sure what question to ask, because I have a few actually.
Start with the first.
I guess the first one is just a sheer one of practicality. And if there are approximately 70 million documents, and at one stage I read there were 80 journalists working on them for, at one stage, a period of 8 months, which meant that you'd have to read 3,645 pages each per day, each of those 80 journalists. It could be that I'm an Australian and this is all we read about with football leagues, but all we read about was Manchester City, presumably because City Football Group's also in Australia, and Chelsea because it's another big club. So what made you, was it just luck that you found those 2 stories, or did you go looking for particular stories?
I think the way we did it was that we divided the different media into our regional areas. So basically, people were like trying to, for instance, I was searching names and clubs and relevant people and search phrases from Denmark, and some of the other Scandinavian countries before we got a Norwegian partner as well. So basically we looked into our different areas, and I don't think it's correct that there's only stories about Chelsea and Manchester City Football Group. There are about Real Madrid, there are about the top players in every country. There are loads of stories about Denmark, and it's not like we have ever been told what to look for. We have searched ourselves in the different media for relevant names, and yes, it's true, and I think, because you are of course right, Manchester City especially, and City Football Group, has been a part of a lot of the stories, even also the Danish related stories, and I assume that will be because a biggest part, a very big or very important part of the documents are related to City Football Group. So they're basically most stories about City Football Group. It's not. One could assume that other big clubs are not a lot better than City Football Group, but we wouldn't necessarily know if we don't have the documents. And as you said, how many documents should we read a day? I'm sure we have not read every document at all as a group, and the group has also read the same document probably a lot of times, because it wasn't possible to organize it in a way where we don't do double work or triple work or quadruple work quite many times. So I think there are a lot of more stories out there, and possibly also a lot of stories more about City Football Group.
I'd like to ask Jeppe a question as well. The Spiegel, the German media company that got access to the documents and shared it with these guys, it's a weekly. And so this information would come out on a Friday night, typically. And I remember when the first batch, I think, of the non-open source stuff, the stuff that Spiegel got by itself in the US, it was a Friday night, and there was, I think, stories on that day about Manchester City, about Monaco, about Gazprom in Russia, and about FIFA. So it was 4. And you, one of your slides on the presentation, you said the impact hasn't been as big as you guys would have liked. Now, I would say, as an observer, as a journalist, if you publish 5 stories on the same day at the same time, they're all going to kind of cannibalize each other. And as a reader, you think, oh my God, some pretty bad stuff's happened in football. Overwhelmed. Because the granular detail in each of those stories probably deserved a week's coverage in itself. No one, for example, the Gazprom story, again, Gazprom denies all.
I don't think anybody here knows about the Gazprom story.
Exactly, that's the point I'm going to make, is no one remembers this thing. No one even talked about it that day. We were too busy talking about, I don't know.
The European Super League was one of the
European Super League that day, or depends what kind. So my question would be, is your publication schedule to me seemed absolutely nuts. It was like, here you go, do what you want with it, and it all kind of went into a mess. And then you did it again a few months later. Why did you guys work like that?
I agree that was a problem with the football leagues, and it was a problem in both the first time in 16 and the ones you mentioned actually the 18, the second round. But it doesn't matter. In both rounds we had these massive splashes of story. The first round was Ronaldo tax evasion at the same time as Jorge Mendes and Radamel Falcao, and also a lot of stories at the same time. It was a big challenge, actually, especially in the first round, because we also had Sunday Times as part of the group, and we had Spiegel publishing only Saturday and Sunday Times only Sunday. In the second round, we also had a TV company, and they had certain slots, TV slots, which also made it really difficult. When I look back at it now, I think we should definitely, Spiegel, of course, have to publish their stories in the magazine on Saturday, but we could probably have worked more with using the digital world better. Like, yes, they can publish it in print on Saturday, but only print one story every other day digitally, because it would give more time for each story to live, and we would be able to publish the relevant documents for each story and give people, especially other media, time to investigate those central documents as well, so they would be able to pick up the story instead of just standing back and saying, whoa, that's a lot. Because I think the general picture was that from each splash, only 1 or 2 stories were picked up, because some of it got lost in the massive amount.
You have a question?
Yeah, I think this has been quite a depressing session, because what we hear from you, Tariq, is that it's impossible to do investigative journalism of European soccer, because you don't get the access, you don't get the information, they'll deny anything, and if you do write something, they'll block you for life. And Jeppe, what you say, if you actually do get some information, you actually do have things to be shown, this is the things as they are, this is what's happening, then there is no impact, there's no consequence in this. Should investigative journalism really just give up on European soccer and say this is just a circus, and if people want to pay for this kind of circus, they can just do it, and then we can look at other things which might have an impact on real life, on real society, also in sports? or could you see some kind of way to change this situation as it is at the moment? Could organizations like UEFA and FIFA in a perfect world work for a situation where this actually does not happen, and if there are regulations, they have consequences? Do you see any kind of, or in England, the FA could say to the clubs, you have to open up more, you have to act like normal companies and not like those closed castles that you are at the moment? Do you see a way of this changing, or should we just give up?
Tariq,
No.
you are most frustrated and depressed? Or
No,
you can answer first.
It might be frustrating, depressing, what we were saying, but look, there have been some impacts. We had criminal tax probes, etc., and famous reopening of a alleged sexual assault case as well, which is really big, and it was thanks to the government. So it will be wrong to say that nothing has worked. What I think is useful to talk about maybe is the constrictions under which we work. There have been some risks. Also, this term investigative journalism, I think about it a lot. Like, I don't think I'm an investigative journalist. I don't think I'm a journalist. Like, I think everyone who does our job is investigating something, is picking up a phone or reading something. I don't think we're hiding in the bushes or anything, And I think we're all that or not, whatever that term is. And in terms of the organisations, these are, in one sense, these are not the FIFA. Let's talk about the leagues and the clubs. These are commercial entities that have billion-dollar contracts with TV companies, for example. So they prioritise access to those people, and in order to get all those billions, they think they have to limit all the access to everybody else in order to justify the billions they're getting from the people who pay for it. That is a tension, because I think the work the rest of the media does grows an interest in it, so they bother to watch on the telly, right? And these should be together. And maybe we should. There was a good example. Newcastle, I think they tried to charge journalists to attend or something like this, and then there was a full boycott. And I think if we work together in some of the most egregious examples of denial of information and access, that might help. But the idea of us working together, maybe the EIC has worked together in some way, I don't see that much kind of synergy and people pulling in the same direction. And in terms of the organisations you mentioned, again, you listen to the discussions in the room next door, in the big room, where the adults were talking about culture and change of governance and all of this. I suppose this all falls into that. If eventually they want to think transparency, I'm not going to use, good governance is something that really needs to happen, then maybe this will be a part of it too, a bit more open. But let me also say, not everybody is awful. There's some fantastic people who work in these organisations. It's not like if you work at FIFA you must be awful. If you work at UEFA, you're awful. If you work at for me, the issue is a systemic, structural issue with the way these organisations have grown up and the way they are today.
If I may add about that, to me it's quite clear that the people in FIFA, for instance, who work with the minors and breaches of minor regulations, trafficking of young football players, they actually do what they can. And they really want to make a change, but I don't think they're enough, no way nearly enough. So it comes back to the organisation who should maybe prioritise this area more. I think we could also do some quite simple things as journalists, like Tariq mentioned, work more together. And I think there are a few things we could do better in the football. There are probably a lot of things we could do better in the Football Leagues project. But I think one of the things is that we could spread out the stories more, as we discussed. We could publish more central documents, which would allow other media to maybe see details we had missed and build up the pressure in the different stories. I have to correct myself about one thing. Actually, it's true that we had the splashes, but in every national media, for instance, Politiken, it was way more spread out. We had stories like, we didn't have like 5 big stories in a day, so it was different in different countries how it was presented. We had like maybe 5 stories a week in 5 different days. So but we did other mistakes like not publishing enough central documents. I think that could have helped other journalists as well.
Why? Why didn't you publish?
I think some of it was stress. I think a lot of it was like trying to manage to see which documents are the most central and how much is relevant to publish. Yeah.
Can I just follow up?
Very short, because it's a question from the guy in the
Is that actually?
Yeah. Come.
Because if I remember right, Spiegel, maybe I'm wrong, but I think Spiegel did not publish a single document.
Oh, that's not true. No. They published a lot of documents. In the end of a lot of the stories, you could see like I think Spiegel are probably the ones who published most documents.
They did some.
Jens, you should start reading the Spiegel.
But they did, and I really mean that they are probably the ones who. I think also maybe we were a bit afraid to publish documents where we might thought that some of the information in the documents didn't have enough relevance for the public. So.
The ones you wrote a story from.
Yeah.
Presumably that.
Yeah, but there's still even in some of those documents there are information that we didn't use because we didn't think it had public interest. So we would have to edit some of the stuff out if they're like personal numbers or salaries, bank accounts and stuff like that.
Question.
Hi, my name is Johnny Coleman. I'm like Andreas, kind of someone who does journalism when he can and somehow cobbles a living together doing that. I'm also an organizer. A lot of my work is centered around the LA Olympics. LA media is kind of a graveyard for how large of a place it is. And to kind of zoom out a little bit, because we talk and think a lot, especially at seminars and panels like these about, the next decade, right? And I think one of the things that connects both the problems in mega event sports and the problems in journalism are the consolidation of capital, right? Like we could say that that's why a major reason why there is very little or no adversarial media in LA and a lot of parts of America. I can't speak on behalf of Europe. So my question is that we know in the next 10 years there's going to be a catastrophic economic event. I'm curious how that is going to affect sports journalism and what are the opportunities there if there is if the media landscape as we know is completely turned upside down overnight. I know that's probably a whole other, you could do an hour on that, but because that will definitively happen in the next decade, give or take a few years. With the cycles of capitalism, we know that, right? That affects real estate, that affects media, that affects sports interests, all the billionaires that are driving the problems that we travel thousands of miles to talk about.
It's already happened, hasn't it? Like the media industry has been decimated and smashed to pieces. What have you seen in the States? You've seen billionaires in LA.
It's the tech industry taking over. So what happens when Uber goes upside down, or WeWork and Netflix?
Well, is it okay for the billionaires to these? These are questions we should have now as well. I guess.
Right.
These singular people, the social good newspapers or media. That's where we are now. And then for our business, we've had the launch in the UK. We've had it in the States for a while of a very different product. The Athletic, which is, I don't know if it's going to work, hopefully, because it gives people meaningful jobs. The subscription model of say, whatever, football, or very verticals, football or NBA or whatever it is. However, does that answer your question of do you have adversarial media, or if you consolidate everything into this one place, that ain't healthy, right?
Right. I just with the next, economic event, I think there's an opportunity for other journalists, or even already now, I'm considering kind of potentially going into academia in order to get a workers-run journalism co-op off the ground, because I feel like we know that everything is basically access journalism right now, except for a handful of journalists in a given field. So will that be the opportunity to get people to have a more, which is the same conversation with the athletes about them recognizing their collective power, that there is no media without the content creators, the writers, there are no publications without the content, right?
I think you should take that discussion in the
Outside,
beer
yeah.
and coffee, because
Sure.
we have a little bit short of time. So I think we should wrap this up a little bit, and I ask the last question before we take coffee and something to eat. After your presentations, one question comes to my mind, and that is, are we dependent on hackers and whistleblowers in the future to do good journalism and to break into these clubs and organizations?
We're not relying on hackers because because it's quite a scary idea, isn't it? You might get some good, some people will get, but if you trawl through everything, you will unearth stuff. But I'm not sure that's a healthy way of conducting business, that you kind of give someone the key to the contents of the world's inbox and say, have a field day. I don't know if the balance is correct, because we will weaponize computer hackers that provide news. Let's hope that's not the future.
I think it's a really interesting debate, and it goes far beyond football. I think we have seen many big journalistic projects within the last few years that are based either on whistleblowers or even hackers. It seems like Panama Papers could probably be a hacker as well. We don't even know who's behind it, and not even the media who did the stories, which is also an ethical debate you can have about that. But luckily, I would say, we still sometimes see big and important stories which are done without hacking, and sometimes even also without whistleblowing. So I think, and I feel that a lot of people want to do good also in sports journalism, but the problem is also that the more the journalism gets measured with clicks and stuff like that, clicks and views and whatever, critical journalism doesn't always sell as much as a football player who scores a great goal and acts stupid when he dances to celebrate it. And that's a big challenge we have in the different media houses, and especially as a freelancer, Andreas, I think you really know that it can be difficult to get people to pay for that kind of journalism, and for the media houses to prioritize those kind of journalism, because it is really, even though we have a gold mine, it's time consuming as, really.
Share some of the documents with the rest of us then.
Yeah.
Okay, Bonita, you are a whistleblower. You can have the last question.
Thank you, Andreas. I just, it's more just a comment, just picking up on some of the issues, and that is the issue around hacking. I think the really bad example of where something that was hacked was misinterpreted by the bias of the journalist or the writers of the book involved was the ugly game. And if you're not sure of what that is, please buy my book and read chapter 1, because I actually unveil it there. And by the way, the proceeds of my book go to the cerebral palsy football team in Australia. But I think that's a really good example of where the journalist or the writers had a bias. They had an end point in mind that they wanted to get to, and come hell or high water, their book was going to get to that end point. But actually, that's not what the evidence was showing. And I think that's a different. I mean, journalists, as you said, Tariq, have to be very aware of themselves in that respect, because if you do have a whistleblower or a source, you check them out thoroughly before you'll accept the information that they're giving to you. So it's really just more of a comment about what that difference is, and from a journalistic perspective, the care you have to take with that information.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we end this. As I said in the introduction, this was the first part of discussing journalism. Tomorrow, Josh will be here together with Hajo Seppelt and discuss journalism and human rights. And before that, we have coffee and something to drink and maybe sleep a little bit, I don't know. Thank you, Tariq. Thank you, Jeppe. Thank you for the audience.